Good morning. This morning I want to try and explain something. We all know, maybe we all know what the fight or flight response system is. It's the you know it's some people call it the stress response. That when you're in a dangerous or stressful situation, how you respond. You either take it on or you run from it, fight or flight. And there's a number of hormones involved: testosterone, adrenaline, and cortisol. I'm not going to go into the whole thing now, but there are a number of variables that'll um, uh, determine whether your response is fight or flight. Your your nature and your nurture being two. Now, um, I used to be in a lot of fights in my life. All my life, I was in a number of fights for a lot of different reasons, and I want to give you a few examples so that you might understand, um, and not just stick a generic label on it, like what they tend to do in modern society. They stick a generic label on it, IDE, uh, intermittent explosive disorder, and all this bullshit, labels, disorder. So I want to try and explain a few things that you might understand. Um, like, for example, first of all, my nature. I was always quick to anger. So was my father, but yet, he was still a very nice man. But he had a temper. This is masculinity, as Jordan Peterson said. I don't agree with what a lot of Jordan Peterson says, but I do agree with one thing. There's a huge backlash against masculinity. It's considered toxic in modern society. But anyway, my father had quite a big, strong man. He had a temper as well, but he always, this is nature nurture. He always encouraged fighting. He never discouraged fighting. He always encouraged fighting. He always taught us that you had to stand up for yourself. That you have to stand up for yourself. That you have to, if somebody tries to subjugate you or disrespect you or emasculate you, you have to. He used to say, break their jaw, hit them, always hit them, stand up for yourself. You have to stand up for yourself. And then, when even in primary school, then to be sort of, to give you an example of what fights would start over, I was small for my age, which means I was prey. I was maybe subject to bullying if I didn't stand up for myself. So, for example, they used to try and in national school, people used to get nicknames, but they tried to stick small fry Conroy on me, and I was having none of it. So if you called me small fry Conroy, I responded in an aggressive and violent manner. I'd fight you. You want to call me small fry Conroy? I'll fight you. And this was a consequence of that they had to consider, that basically it didn't take long for everybody to know that if you wanted to call me small fry Conroy, I was going to box over it. So this is just one example. And then my father never discouraged this. The only thing he used to ask me when I come home from school, or if there was a report I had been fighting in school, he used to say, "Did you win? Did you win?" And I says, "Yeah, I won. Yeah, I won." He said, "Oh, good man." And then this was national school. And then when I went on to secondary school, not only did he encourage the fighting, but he actually said, he said, "Well, if you're in any fights in school, he said, always make sure and do enough damage." He said, because if you don't do enough damage, you're going to have to fight them every week, and you're going to have to fight their friends. But if you always make sure that you do enough, he said, you won't have to do it every week, and you won't have to fight their friends, because to be a mental block, nobody will want some of this. And even though they'll talk about coming back, and they'll talk about what they're going to do, they won't. And he was right in this, because I obviously, well, I found this to be true, to be effective, to be effective. In my own case as well, if I ever got enough of a kicking, I didn't go back for more. There was a mental block that stopped me going back for more. Like, even though I used to think, oh, I'm going to go back for this, I'm going to go back, I'm going to fix this, he's not getting away with that. But you didn't go back, you didn't. There was a mental block that stopped it. It was like, you know, if you put your hand in the fire and you burn your hand, even as a child, you're not going to do it again. There's a natural block, that a defense mechanism that kicks in, that stops you doing stupid things like jumping off the garage roof and breaking your legs. There's an inhibitor that kicks in a different level in most people. But anyway. But then in secondary school, for example, like the AIDS epidemic came out in 1985, but then in school, they used to chew up bits of paper and put them in a pen and blow them at the classmates. Now, if you blew one of them at me, like my mother, when the AIDS came out in 1985, my mother used to say to us, oh, don't drink out of anyone else's cup and all this and this, that, the other. And the whole, if there was blood spilled, any body interaction fluid or any blood, this really clamped down on the whole on society, you know. Fight was no longer acceptable, because if there was blood spilled, it was, oh, blood, you know what I mean? Like, AIDS, you know. So this really played a big factor in changing society. But if you blew one of these saliva-filled balls of paper at me through a pen, I was going to box over it. I'd fight over it. And then it went on from this, it went on to I started doing door work. But then before I even started doing the door work, I used to go to a nightclub every night called Pedigree Corner, and every week there'd be a fight. But this was part of life. And I think everybody actually loved to fight in Pedigree Corner. They used to play that Nirvana, Smells Like Teen Spirit, and this was the fuse. So everybody used to get out to dance to Nirvana, Smells Like Teen Spirit, and everybody used to start, and then the whole thing would kick off on the floor, and there'd be a huge melee of everybody fighting. But this was just part of the weekend. We like to fight, like men in particular like to fight, and there's a reason for this. It was a pressure valve, a release thing. That, for example, like this is a natural response, because if you have stress, and then you get this opportunity to open the pressure valve and release this stress, and fighting was one way in which this stress used to be released. But my point is that this was completely natural and completely acceptable, and then society started to change. And to give you an example of how society started to change is when I was doing the bouncer training course. And I was working with this well-seasoned bouncer who was we were putting together a curriculum, but I was bringing in the scenario-based training. And so, for example, right, he said to me, let's do this. And I says, right, yeah, right, you stand in the door, and I'm going to want to come in. But anyway, we went through the rigmarole, and he said to me, you know, you won't be coming in, you know. And I got right into his face, and I said, what are you going to do if I decide I am coming in? And he says to me, I lay down on the ground, it'll take 2 ambulances to get me up. And he says, I'll get compensated and I'll take you to jail. He says, is it worth it for a price of a pint? He said, we can just go down the road and get one. I remember standing back from him, looking at him, saying, what the fuck is this? Because I absolutely wasn't expecting this. I was expecting maybe something to kick off, and we have a little bit of a thing on the door or whatever it is, or I was expecting him to physically restrain me in some regard. But I absolutely wasn't expected to be presented with a shitstorm of consequences, in which I very quickly had to back up. You know what I mean? I had to stick it in reverse very, very quick. But my point is that when society changed, like it did away with the corporal punishment, the hitting the children in school, did away with the parents hitting the children, and then it went on to that if there was any fighting, that was completely socially unacceptable, and there was going to be a shitstorm of consequences. Basically, fighting was an end. But the point I'm trying to make is they brought in a shitstorm of consequences, as I say, there was going to be court action, there was going to be this, there was going to be everything, this physical dominance was over. But what I'm trying to say is, what you do with all the people who by nature have who the response system is to fight. It's not flight, it's fight. So this was the nature's way of dealing with stressful and threatening situations. And basically society's answer to this was label them as mentally ill and chemically castrate them. And even if you didn't chemically castrate them, they have to suppress these emotions because nobody taught them how to respond differently. Nobody taught them how to perceive life differently. Everybody just taught them that there's consequences in place. So you have to suppress any anger. You have to suppress any anger because it's absolutely not socially acceptable, and fighting is absolutely out of question. So there's no release valve. There's no release valve. Now what that's going to result in is depression. So then, even if you don't chemically castrate them, what you have is depression, which you now put them on mood stabilizers and mood enhancers, or basically, if you manage to socially engineer this out. So, in other words, through epigenetics, this results in is low testosterone levels, and low testosterone levels are connected with such conditions as what they now have labelled as bipolar. This is a lot of men who suffer with bipolar have been found to have lower than the normal testosterone levels, considering that they have spent a number of years pushing down the baseline for normal, if you understand what I'm saying. And girls who suffer from bipolar have elevated testosterone levels. In other words, this is being oppressed or being suppressed, but because it's no longer socially acceptable. What I'm saying is they brought in the consequences, but they didn't bring in any system of teaching them how to perceive the world differently, how to respond differently. But basically, like if you're familiar with the role cortisol plays in the body, like when you're in a stressful situation, the body releases cortisol, and this is just one hormone now. This is just one hormone. The body releases cortisol, and when the body releases cortisol, it significantly inhibits your ability to think. You can't. It's very difficult to think. This is then the body will go into the natural response of either fight or flight. But obviously, if you're conditioned in a certain regard, there is no fight. There can't be a fight. But this is just cortisol. But if I used to say, like, when I said to myself, oh, we don't want cortisol because it strips muscle. So I blocked the cortisol. And if you block the cortisol, this is even worse because you'd be crying at the traffic lights. The body cannot deal with any stress whatsoever. If you block the cortisol, I'm telling you, you'd be sitting at the traffic lights crying your eyes out in the car because you cannot deal with any stress whatsoever. What I'm saying is that's if you block the cortisol. But what I'm saying is you have to learn, in order to manage your emotions, you have to learn to perceive life so there is no cortisol release, or there's no escalation to these levels of stress. It's not that you have to learn to manage the stress. What I'm trying to say to you is you have to learn to perceive life in a way that there is no stress. This is management of the emotions. It's not stress management. It's actually learning to perceive life so that there is no stress. And this is completely different from learning to deal with the stress. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's completely learning. It's because it's learning to perceive life that you're not dealing with the anger. It's learning to perceive life that there is no anger, that there is no anger, that there is no stress. And this is it's not dealing with the emotions. It's learning to perceive life so that there is the emotions don't arise. Do you understand?